Hey guys, welcome back to the Danger Planet. Today we're going to be doing our faction focus overview series around the Madness of Malifaux expansion. I'm back with Jesse from Boring Conversation. Say hi,
Hey y'all,
Jesse.
what's up?
And we're going to be going through Lin Ly and the Red Library and story keywords. Hey guys, welcome back to the Danger Planet. We're actually doing the second in our faction focus series for the Madness of Malifaux book. If you guys haven't seen it already, we recorded an episode on the Cavalier keyword with Tull, so check that out. But I am back here with Jesse from Boring Conversation. Say howdy, Jesse.
Hey everybody.
And Jesse, I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. Why don't you kick it off and give us a little bit of background on what's going on with the Red Library keyword, who is Lin Ly, and how does this whole scenario fit into what's going on with the Ten Thunders in the Madness of Malifaux book?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I will say right off the top is I'm going to apologize to everybody in advance. There are a lot of character names with Asian heritages, specifically several of them from China, Japan, and Vietnam, and we are probably going to pronounce some stuff wrong.
All of them by mistake.
So feel free to comment with the appropriate pronunciation so that we can set us straight. And I'm not calling something, the wrong name for
one of these models. I think is impossible to pronounce correctly.
Yeah,
when we get to it,
I'm sure somebody will correct me, and I'll remember from that point. But I still call her Jedza, not Yedza. Sorry, Sam. Like, what am I gonna do? Yeah. All right. So what's the deal with Lin Ly and the Red Library keyword? So one thing that's pretty cool and very core to the story of this particular character is, what is the Red Library? Well, it's a small part of the Library of All Things, which is controlled by the Ten Thunders, and it has all sorts of different materials and stories and background for everything from the Three Kingdoms. And then everybody who enters into Malifaux, some portion of their story ends up being transcribed in the Library of All Things. It is a really massive, really imposing, and frankly intimidating place that most people are afraid to venture into. And the Red Library is a portion of that Library of All Things, which focuses primarily on the lore of the Ten Thunders faction. So Lin Ly's background is that she was a child in occupied Vietnam. Vietnam in this story is being oppressed by French and Guild occupiers. So she grew up in what amounts to essentially an occupied war zone. Her father tried to protect her from all of the evils of the society, and she really found herself falling into books as a way of escape. Eventually, she ended up getting shipped off to Malifaux for her own protection, and sort of against her will ended up being conscripted into working in the Library of All Things. As time passed, Misaki Katanaka would occasionally come to her for information, guidance, and they ended up developing a friendship over time. And Lin Ly actually found that she had an ability to bring stories from the Red Library and from those different aspects of, Asian descent and folklore to life. So
TLDR,
she actually, yeah.
TLDR, you ever seen that movie, The Page Master, from the mid-90s?
Yeah.
It's Page Master goes to Malifaux, or I guess Page Master is in Malifaux.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this actually is going to comprise of two different keywords, one of them being Red Library, which essentially is all the mortal members of the keyword, and then the story keyword, which is going to be all of those characters from lore and fiction that are brought to life.
Yeah, and she's got and I think the other thing is, I thought it's particularly cool is the budding relationship, or I guess the relationship that develops between Misaki as she goes back to Lin to look for nuggets of wisdom, or because in the lore, right, Misaki fractured is having a rough time, right, with kind of the developments of Malifaux Burns, and I think that relationship between her and Lin is pretty interesting. because Misaki doesn't particularly like too many people or trust too many people, right?
Yeah, definitely. She's one that's always jumping at shadows, and she expects to be betrayed pretty much any time. So the
All
fact
the
that
time.
she's developed a trusted relationship with somebody else is surprising, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so she's got 2 modes. She's got the first one, which is it's not bibliophile, it's the bibliothergary. I'm not...
Bibliothecary.
Yeah.
like apothecary, but at the beginning. Bibliothecary.
But with books.
Right.
All right. I think that's a really good lore overview from kind of a perspective of what is the Red Library, what are the story characters, how do they interweave into the Malifaux universe. Jesse, why don't you give us a little bit of context on what they're trying to do on the tabletop from a gameplay perspective? And I think the best place to start is probably by breaking down the 2 different versions of Lynn.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably one of the most important things, because it comes up on a number of different cards and abilities on cards that interact with this, is the keyword ability, which is called Well-Versed. So each model in the keyword, aside from the totem, has this ability. It's a front of card one. Basically, once per turn, before this model would flip a card, it can look at the top card of its fate deck and discard it. So you have to kind of be able to keep track of who's used their Well-Versed as you go through the turn. But as long as you can manage that, what it really does is it makes sure that most of the time, especially if you're using it on some of your simple duels, you're going to be hitting your TNs without typically having to worry very much about using cards from your hand to do it. And that really is going to play into one of the big aspects of this keyword on the whole, which is resource generation and management. Kind of the opposite of where we found Harold Tull and his crew being potentially resource strapped and really having to be careful about what they use their cards for. This is a keyword that has a bunch of card draw. It comes with Arcane Reservoir, plus you have the Well-Versed. You're probably going to succeed pretty much all of your simple duels, and you have a good chance of winning a lot of your opposed duels as well. I actually see some of the card manipulation mechanics falling in line with some of the stuff that Lynch does. I feel like this crew can kind of fit into the same hole that Lynch's crew does a lot of times. One of the cool things about the 2 different versions of the Master, though, are that actually one version of the Master works much more fluidly with the Red Library keyword and most of the mortal models in the crew, whereas the Storyteller, which is the second keyword, is going to focus a lot more on enhancing and working with the story models in the crew. Now, it's not to the point of not hiring the story models if you take Bibliothecary or yeah, I got it right. Or not hiring Red Library models if you take Storyteller. I feel like they've done a really good job of interweaving the way that these different models work.
But I think you're right, though. You are spot on. You need to be aware that certain very powerful triggers and abilities will only work on subsections of the keyword. I think that's an important call out to make.
Yeah, there's some kind of similarities to the way that like Sandeep plays in that sense. So you just have to kind of be aware of making sure that you have both some Red Library and some story models probably in any crew that you hire. And it's just a matter of making sure that the stuff that you do bring is complementary to the version of the Master that you brought in.
Yeah, I think that's a good take.
Yeah, so Bibliothecary, what does she do? So this is really a model that is, the way that I see it, primarily support and resource generation. She's not going to require a lot of resources throughout the course of her activation. If you look at the back of her card, most of the abilities on it are just kind of okay. Like, it's not like Harold Tull with a grenade launcher that's going to deal ridiculous damage within a huge area. Like, she's not going to be dropping big bombs of damage. What she is going to be doing, however, is picking up markers and drawing cards with Lost Knowledge, which we all know is a great ability. She also has once per turn ability for only a 6, where without any suit requirement, where you can target a model that's already activated in this turn and give it the ability to activate again and use its well-versed ability again. That is probably the defining feature of what this Master does. is she gives you activation control without having to muck around with pass tokens. You literally just get extra activations, which is pretty powerful. It also means that, and this is something I always find kind of interesting, is that she's not really a master that you have to activate first. Most of the time you don't want to. I like masters where you can kind of hold the activation back and pop it in at a key point in the turn. She could, conceivably speaking, even activate, at the end of the turn, do her stuff, move some models around, drop some scheme markers, give one of your models the ability to reactivate, and now you're usually doing stuff kind of unopposed or with minimal opposition from your opponent. I really like that.
Yeah, and she also has, now correct me if I'm wrong, because you play more 10 Thunders than I do, but I think that this is the only master in 10 Thunders with Lost Knowledge.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, which is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Lost Knowledge is good.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. The other thing, this version of the model, of the master, really is going to focus heavily on dropping scheme markers. And the whole keyword utilizes scheme markers for various game effects, but this particular one, you really want a lot of scheme markers out. She's only got 10 wounds, and she's got kind of a mediocre stat line. She also has a bunch of stuff that's going to be auras that are really only going to affect an area of between 4 and 8 inches around her. So she does kind of need to be board center to really be effective. Most of her stuff is fairly short range. And you would think that makes her, kind of in a dangerous spot. She actually has a 4-inch aura, though, where she can
Keeper of the Red
Library, where she can reduce all damage that she suffers by 1 for each friendly scheme marker within a 4-inch aura to a max of reduction 2. So it's because of the amount of marker dropping that you have in this keyword, it's actually pretty easy to get her to effective armor 2. Which helps enormously. The other thing that she does is anytime that any marker is dropped within 4 inches of her, once per activation, she can give an enemy model within 2 inches of the drop marker distracted with no test required. It just happens. So that's just another layer of sort of passive defense that she has. Between giving out free distracted throughout the course of the turn and having pseudo potentially armor 2, she's actually a lot more defensible than she really looks.
Yeah.
The other cool thing that... Oh, go ahead, Doug.
I think you're right. I think the intention is get her in the center of the board in a semi-paced safe position, do a little bit of setup for her so that when she moves into that position, she's effectively an armor 2 model, basically. Yeah,
exactly. The other thing that she has, which is very unique, there's really nothing else in the game that does this, is this really cool front of card ability called Split Focus, where during the start phase, as long as she's the leader, 2 other friendly red library models within an 8-inch aura can gain slow to take either a general or a melee action during the start phase. And then the keyword itself has a couple of ways that you can actually remove slow from your models, which is actually just going to give you bonus actions just for having her as your leader. And in particular, her henchman, Map, can actually end the slow condition on himself, heal 2 if you hit the trigger, and give slow to an enemy model all for 1 action.
And so you're flipping at that point. That is a massive AP advantage if you can pull that off, because you're getting the AP advantage out of the actions from her, and then Map or I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but however it's
you got it.
That if you can pull off Map's ability, I mean, that's a net of effectively you're gaining 2, but then your opponent is effectively also losing 2. So that's a delta of a 4 AP swing at that point if you pull it off to the most extent.
And the fact that now bear in mind, most of the red library models don't have super dangerous melee attacks. So like the fact that you can take melee attacks in the start phase before your opponent even gets a chance to activate anything, it's not like you're going to be dropping like 4 and 6 damage bombs on people before they get a chance to do anything. Most of the models have, basically the melee attacks that they're taking for effects rather than the damage. But Map in particular, his melee attack is bored to death, where he can deal damage and give out
slow.
Right. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. And
then
you
can go before the round even starts, punch a thing, that thing also generates another effective AP because of the slow trigger. So it's just really good.
And then if you happen to hit the Deja Vu trigger, which is easily one of the best card draw triggers in the game, you can actually replenish the cards that you're spending to land the attacks during the start phase before you even get to the main turn. It's pretty wild, and I think it's something that's easily overlooked. Now, that said, this model, I think, really floats on her front of card. Her back of card is very good. The double shift action is great. Lost Knowledge is great. But the stuff that makes this model really shine is its front of card abilities. She can actually do a bonus action with no flip needed that lets her take the interact action even if engaged, and she actually counts as, like, you get a 4-inch range where you can actually do that interact in, which allows you to drop a marker even if you're engaged, give out distracted, give her something to reduce damage with. Like, it's pretty solid.
Control of the red library. I'm telling you now, even at my LGS, I am gonna watch that get some people the first or second times it happens to them, because it's just hard to, you read it and then you're like, okay, so she can interact in a 4-inch radius around herself without and while engaged. Like, you're going to be dropping interactions wherever you want in a relatively big bubble as a result.
Yeah, and being able to give out the distracted within 2 inches of whatever the dropped marker is, essentially you're looking at a 4-inch range where you can drop the marker up to, plus about an inch for the marker itself, and then another 2 inches, so you can conceivably give something an unresistible distracted up to 7 inches away. Pretty impressive.
Good.
And then her last kind of key ability is just one of those things that's going to help bog your opponent down, heal your models, and that's one where the New Cry from a Broken Heart, she can essentially move a scheme marker up to 6 inches in any direction. Any enemies that get moved through have to take a test or gain slow, which is nasty, especially if you're hitting a couple of enemy models. And then if you hit the trigger, friendly models that it moves through get to heal, which is just great. So I think that this master is going to take reps to really figure out. I actually think she's probably going to be kind of a sleeper hit. I think a lot of people are going to look at her and think that she's not really that great. I see a lot. I see a lot of play here.
I see a lot of play here too. And you're right when you say that these models aren't. This is not a keyword filled with min 3 beaters. If that's what you're looking for, there are many other 10 Thunders masters that will provide min 3 beaters with good stated attacks to you. What you're getting out of this keyword is real strong flexibility from a point scoring perspective, the ability to hand out slow, which is one of the most powerful debuff conditions in the game. Like, it's candy. Like, half of these models have an ability to give an opponent slow, like in her keyword. And on top of that, I really do think it's a big deal. 10 Thunders has Lost Knowledge now, which was a thing they just didn't have before. And marker removal could be a little bit of a annoyance for them in the past, but I think this is a good thing that's still in here. So
you figure what's going to happen. Basically, what the order of activation is going to be is you use her ability, make 2 of your models take actions or melee attacks in the start phase, burn a couple of cards, maybe hit a Deja Vu with map, do another activation or 2, deplete your hand down to a couple of cards, and then you activate Lin Ly, you double shift something, you lost knowledge once or twice, now you have a full hand again.
Yeah. Like, and you're just burying your opponent in AP value. It's not like an activation thing like Yuko might have, or it's not spamming tons of damage, but you have such a mountain of activation advantage that you should snowball from a point scoring perspective. Now, you need to be careful because you're not necessarily removing opponents' models from the game, but you are making them a lot less effective, and you are getting more actions than your opponent is getting.
Yeah, that's one real big hallmark of this particular keyword is, again, a lot like Harold Tull's keyword. It's not super punchy, but it is absolutely loaded with abilities that are going to displace enemy models, put them into disadvantageous positions, and then you also gain the benefit of potentially being able to put out a lot of slow, so that when they actually activate a model, sometimes there's really not that much they're going to be able to do with it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead with that 9-point minion that I put slow onto that's 8 inches away from anything and needs to walk to get over to me. Go right ahead, you know? Which I think this strikes me as low ceiling or low floor, mega high ceiling.
Yeah.
Mega high ceiling. So why don't we talk a little bit about her other version? What happens when you become a storyteller?
So with Linh Ly Storyteller, your whole theme changes to being one where you actually can put out a significant amount of damage. She can be pretty punchy, and she really does a lot to benefit the story models in her keyword, less so the red library models. So she is a master that you're probably going to want to get into board center, and she is just going to dominate that area. One of her front of card abilities, by the book, it's so gnarly. So any enemy models, oh my god, enemy models within a 6-inch aura that cheat fate lose all suits in the duel total. Period. End of story. Built-in suits, stones that they've spent, the suit from the actual flip, like they just lose them. They're gone. Yeah, it's gross.
It's really, really good.
Yeah. The other thing that you're going to get is a front of card actability or a front of card action where anytime a friendly story model damages an enemy, Linh Ly can heal 1. So the more story models that you take with her, the more opportunity you're going to have for her to just get incidental heals throughout the turn so that she can stay up. Because in terms of defensive abilities, I mean, really all she has is a stat 6 defense, 12 wounds, and by the book. And that's pretty much it. And I mean, that's really it. So if somebody comes in and punches on her, you know, they can probably put her down. She's relying on that legendary figure's ability, and then also some of the other models in her crew to help keep her up. Now that said, when she does activate, she's going to have a doozy of an activation because her melee attack is just filthy.
It has one of the best triggers, in my opinion. It's a dark horse candidate for one of the best triggers in the game, which is killer late fees, in my mind.
I mean, man, stat 6, 3, 4, 5 with killer late fees, mutilate, and pulled here and there.
Yeah, those are all good triggers.
They're all good. They're all good. And like mutilate again gives out more slow, and for the models that already have slow, thanks to her or some other models that have activated, now she turns into a 4, 5, 6 damage track with. Ugh, that's gross.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really cool with her is she can do. I mean, she has confiscated lore, which is a very good ability. Confiscated lore. Whenever I see that on a master, I key in on that immediately. So I've been doing some hyperbolic time chamber training with Sonya too, and let me tell you, my man, confiscated lore is a hell of an ability. Specifically on this card, the way that I see that playing out is. You kind of set up a model to try to be removed. Now, maybe that's a model that has hard to kill or revive demise ability. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of models now that Burns has come out with troublesome demise abilities. Cough max 2, Cough levy 1, Cough, you know, all these models that we see. Now, what you can do with that is you can get some focus on her. You might even not need focus. You trigger confiscated lore, neg stack your opponent's deck, make sure that it's all clear, go in, stone for that killer late fees trigger, and just try to one-shot chunk a model off the board, you know, whether or not they're relying on hard to kill or like a comeback ability, and she just deletes that off the board.
And one very important point that I'd forgotten to mention with Linh Ly Storyteller is that she actually has the story keyword. Right. Bibliothergary does not. She only has it during the hiring process. But Linh Ly actually has it, so any of the abilities that she has that affect story models, most of the time she can also affect herself with.
Which is a big deal.
Big deal.
And that's a subtle call out, but I think a really important one. In a dual keyword, you know, team like this. So
yeah, definitely. And then like her storycraft ability is just another way that you can set models up to get murked. I mean, it's a 10-inch range on willpower, gives the target adversary story, and then also lets you reuse your well-versed ability for a second time that turn. So, like, theoretically speaking, Linh Ly can activate she can well-versed when she does storycraft to make sure that she's, going to get rid of a low card or maybe even get to a high card so that she knows what she's going to flip. She lands the adversary. She gives herself the ability to use her well-versed ability again, potentially give a coordinated attack to another story model that's near her.
Like Map who gives out slow.
Exactly, like Map who gives out slow. Then she gets to take her, she's already probably taken confiscated lore, so she knows what your opponent's going to flip. So she's going to be, storycraft is going to go off. She gets to take an attack with her melee, which is already pretty gnarly, hitting that min-4 because of the mutilate. Like, it's gross. And then she sets up the model to get murked by other story models throughout the rest of the turn.
Yeah, which is nice. And so I was talking, folks who have seen the channel before have Rich Butler is a really good friend of mine who I do a lot of testing with, and he beats my butt in Malifaux on a pretty regular basis. And he was talking a lot about what you just talked about, Jesse, with the Storyteller. In fact, when we were talking this morning, what he told me is he thinks the majority of the time he's going to lean into the Storyteller version, and he thinks he would go to the prior version really only when lost knowledge is a really big deal for him.
I would definitely say. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say because he likes exactly what you were just talking about. Literally the sequence you were just talking about. Yeah,
and this is it's kind of funny because we were talking about Bibliothergary being sort of like a high, what do you call it? A low floor, very high ceiling master.
Yeah.
This is kind of the opposite, where this is a pretty high floor, and it's not that complicated to actually pilot this master. So this is definitely the one that you're going to have an easier time starting with, and then as you learn the way the keyword works, maybe flexing into Bibliothergary so that you can play the control game.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to make sure that we mention before we move on from the master, holy heck, the Jade Rabbit is cool.
Yeah, it's one of the coolest totems in the game. I think it's just neat. I mean, Arcane Reservoir is always great. Lucky is ridiculous. Like, I mean, it's basically a red Joker magnet is what it comes down to. So that's probably what's going to kill it most of the time is a Joker.
Yeah. Or it forces. So and you're exactly right. It forces your opponent to have the red Joker. So if you want to lock down like a minion or something, you can run the rabbit in there, especially if it's not a Soulstone user, and basically just they're going to have a real hard time hitting this rabbit if they can't use if they're not attuned. And even if they are attuned to hit this thing, you're going to have to probably burn a focus plus a Soulstone for a plus flip.
Yep. And I think it on its own basically gives you Arcane Reservoir, and it does get to drop a marker at the end of its activation for freezies, which is great. It is insignificant, so if it does get killed, like, you usually don't care. But the thing that it's really doing for you is Moonlight, which is just it's like the way that it works is you target a marker, any marker, it doesn't have to be a scheme marker, within 6 inches, and then until the end phase, enemy models within a 2-inch aura increase the TN of all of their actions by +2. So I mean, that just straight up screws a lot of models. Like they might have to waste an AP walking away from the marker just so that they don't see that +2.
You could potentially even do that twice in a turn, because you could target 2 different markers. Like if you're up against like the new Angler keyword, for example, shoot 2 different Riptides. Those are big deals because they're all hanging out next to the Riptides markers. Yeah, absolutely. And if you do end up seeing a summoner on the other side of the table, hoo boy, summoners really hate having their TNs increased. Like, I have a red Joker and I still can't summon my big guy. Like, that's great. Executioners now cost 15 instead of a 13 or whatever. Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So do you want to talk a little bit about I mean, we've talked about Map a bunch. He's come up a couple of times here. Do we want to quickly just go over Map because Map feels like an auto hire to me. I think that the keyword really requires Map to function. I don't think you ever leave him at home. I think going over him would be a good idea. Yeah, why don't you give the folks at home your TLDR on this lovely blue Muppet-looking gentleman here? Yeah, so Map is essentially a defensive model and mega tar pit, who also can generate a ton of resources. He's got some pretty unique abilities. He's a henchman. With
8 stones, or I'm sorry, 8 stone henchman with 8 wounds and defense 6.
And
He
hard
has
to wound.
and hard to wound, which is a big deal on an 8 wound model. He also has a really cool ability where at the end of his activation, he heals 2 for every enemy, for every model, not just enemy model, but every model within a 4-inch aura that has slow. Surprise, surprise, you can put out slow with the master and with a couple other models in the keyword, and he can put out slow himself. So there's a pretty good chance that at the end of his activation, he's just going to straight up heal 4 just for freezies.
Yeah.
And that's important because his other big linchpin ability is that within another friendly red library, not story, but red library model within 6 suffers damage, like either version of the master, it can reduce that damage by 1 to a minimum of 0. And then this model suffers a damage instead.
Yeah.
So
plus, I mean, he has your namesake too as a fast action.
It's true. He has boring conversation. So that's key because if you remember in Bibliothergary, she has essentially armor 2. And this gives her an additional layer of defense that can bring damage down to 0. Just kind of a big deal. His melee attack is not very impressive until you realize that it has deja vu and he's a henchman, so he can probably get the suits for it.
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 damage and slow targeting willpower to then discard a card and draw 2 cards. He just generates resources like crazy. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, this guy's good. He's really good.
The
The only thing that I can think of is he could be susceptible to enemy lures to get him out of position because he doesn't have laugh off or anything like that. So if you can lure him out of where like the red library player wants him, then he becomes less effective, I think. But I mean, this model's good.
I mean, he's also got an ability that can target friendlies or enemies and move them up to their move towards a marker, and then they either take damage or heal, whatever you want. It's also called Take a Look, which is probably one of my favorite pop culture references.
Take a look. It's in a book. Of reading Rainbow. Yeah. I was singing that to Rich while he was playing, and it lasted about 5 seconds until he very politely asked me to stop singing in the middle of the LGS, which is fair.
So his other cool thing is that, like I said, with Bibliothergary's ability, the start of turn ability, where he can gain slow to take an action during the start phase, he has an ability where he can end a condition on a friendly target,
which potentially can be himself, because
which can be himself.
He is friendly to himself.
He can hit the mend trigger to heal a flat 2, and then an enemy model within 3 inches of the target has to pass a TN 12, or they gain the condition themselves. So he can just shuffle slow or whatever else he wants onto another model. And then most importantly, he's got boring conversation, which of course is the biggest reason that I love him. And his boring conversation has the lie down and nap ability, which
a casual shielded 3.
Just you use it as his last action and his activation, and he just gets shielded 3 basically every activation, so that the first 3 pings of damage that he's taking from Guardian of Knowledge aren't actually doing anything to him.
And on top of that, he's a stat 6 def, stat 5 willpower, hard to wound model. So that's just
he's
good.
Great.
So the one other call out I want to make, because I think this guy is just so strong, and I'm actually kind of curious about what your opinion on this model is the story of Rajan. Holy, does this model seem awesome? And I wanted to call it out as well because I know you're a Bayou player.
Yes.
You love maddening drums.
Yes.
I know it. I know you do.
Yes.
So why don't you talk to us a little bit about kind of all of the stuff that this guy brings to the table, and just what your thoughts are, because I think this guy stands out to me as very strong as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of models in the keyword that are all super strong. I think Story of Rajan is going to be one of those sometimes foods, kind of like we were talking about with the model over in the Cavalier keyword. To your point, I love maddening drums. I play Gluttony a lot. I think played Gluttony in you and I first game together.
Oh, you picked up Ototo in a violently aggressive fashion. I remember that activation, and I remember the first time I had maddening drums used against me, and holy, did that blow Ototo out of the water.
You're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
So essentially, when you take Gluttony in Bayou, you take him just for maddening drums, because really nothing else on his card does anything of significance. Story of Rajan has maddening drums. It's actually the second model in the game with it. But then he also does a bunch of other awesome stuff.
A million other things.
To be fair, and I was talking to Pope Darpa earlier today about him. He is not nearly as defensible as Gluttony is, because he doesn't have stones. He doesn't have manipulative. That said, this keyword does have a lot of abilities to kind of shield him from damage, which I think really are going to help keep him on the table. But man, oh man, this model.
I mean, he is stat 6s across the board with hard to wound as well.
Yeah.
And he does also have
middle of the storm, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah, I mean, he's just got so much stuff on his card.
Yeah,
I love it.
I think this guy's really solid. And the call out there is what I wanted to talk about, which was second model in the game that has maddening drums. The only other model is taken specifically because it has maddening drums.
Right.
And then the other thing that stands out to me, and we don't have to go over each one of these in hyper detail, but touching on it really quickly, Story of Sun Wukong, tons of movement tricks. You want a scheme runner, you want a model that's going to be able to blip all over the board, be in different positions through charging movement tricks, through resurrection movement tricks. Story of Sun Wukong, again, I think he's a sometimes food, but when you bring him in when he matters, that's really good. Like, for example, the play pattern that I saw was, let's say you do Journey to the West. You can Journey to the West, push this model, its move in any direction, place it into base contact, and then you can do the ram trigger somersault strike, flip over the model, and because he has a 2-inch engagement, you can flip potentially out of the engagement of the enemy and then keep running past them, right? If you're trying to get like to sides of the board.
Yep.
Plus,
and
on
then,
top of that,
go ahead. Yeah.
His 7 means of immortality, the demise trigger. If you want him just anywhere else on the board, like let's say you're playing covert operations as a primary, that like Sun Wukong stands out to me as very good in covert ops, basically.
Yeah. And also you can use, at the start of his activation, you can use his bonus action, Speed of a Meteor, to get close to enemy models. And then you can potentially use Journey of the West to just straight up kidnap something. You can throw it behind you. And you can do it, it's only a once per turn, but it gives you the ability to run in, kidnap an enemy model, and push it back towards your crew where it's isolated and away from its support team.
Or just out of relevance, like in a position where it needs to spend AP to get back in position.
Right. Or if it's already activated, then it's just kind of
foobar.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I did want to mention on Story of Rajan, going back just a little bit, which I think is very, very, very key, especially in the Bibliothergary version of the keyword, of the master rather, is the electric fields trigger on his Thunderstruck ability. Basically, you're going to wait to activate Story of Rajan until you have at least a 6 crow so that you can get this off. You're going to drop Thunderstruck near your master. Just make sure that you have the card to pass the duel, because she doesn't ignore it. And then all of the scheme markers that are touched by this Shockwave 2 marker turn into 1-inch areas of hazardous that only affect enemy models.
Yeah.
So if your master is getting mobbed by stuff, you can literally just make a field of hazardous around her. Yeah,
which is a pretty good. And I think that's extra good in a scenario where you're playing the Storyteller variant, and she might need a little bit of ability to dissuade your opponent from trying to punch her, because she's trying to get in there with her melee, right? Obviously, I think that's a really good call out. I do want to talk also briefly about, I'm going to mispronounce this one.
Tom
Yeah, the young man on a horse. I saw Rich, to go back to Rich Butler, I saw Rich play a game on Thursday with this guy, and holy heck, does this model seem good as well.
Oh boy. Oh boy, is this thing good. So, Thunders doesn't have a rider, because Yasunori doesn't exist, and it's not
a real model
anyway.
Yasunori's not real, it can't hurt you.
Right. So this is, I mean, it's not as good as a rider, let's be real, but this is basically the new Thunder's rider.
It's also 8 points.
Yeah. Yeah, 8 points with a take the hit that can once a turn be a 6-inch aura.
Crazy.
Like, what?
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's, again, damage track isn't tremendous, but it has this crazy trigger on a crow where it gains shielded equal to the damage dealt by the attack. Like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting minimum shielded 2 and potentially up to shielded 5.
5? I've never seen a model generate shielded 5 before.
It's wild.
Yeah,
It's wild. It also gives you, like, its Righteous Protector ability just kind of helps with unpacks. It can get a free attack off of it if you hit the ram, which, like, again, the fact that it's a henchman and can stone for all of these really key triggers is awesome.
You know what I also heard was pretty good in Malifaux? Pulsing non-resistible damage, which this model also does.
Oh, and he does healing at the same time.
And and by the way, also healing at the same time. It is relevant to note he's a size 3, so his pulses are gonna be, he's gonna be able to get in there with a bunch of size 2 models, have line of sight to all the things that he needs to pulse out to most of the time. So the majority of these pulses are going to be affecting both friendly and enemy. And he can also get himself into position with his take the hits to then come in, pulse the heal, and pulse the damage.
Yeah, like, you know how Yannick is like the bee's knees and Outcasts right now because of, democratic elections or whatever it's called, where like you can deal damage, to a couple of models if you, deal some damage to some other friendly models. Like, this guy just does it all. He's like, actually, I'm just going to damage all the enemies and heal all the friendlies.
Yeah, actually, like, I'm just going to do everything with my fast action.
This is not a democracy. Basically.
Yeah, Heart of the Child is a hell of an action.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
And also, honestly, I mean, we talked about the shield generation, but he also has a lot of other really good triggers that are kind of uncommon. Like, for example, I think the only other model I've seen with a From the Heavens trigger is the undead chick from Kurai's, who's Datsubai. Is it Datsubai?
Yep.
Is that the one
I think
with...
Ohuguro Batari from Asami's keyword has it too, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, that's a pretty unique trigger, honestly. Not too many models in the game have that one. And like we said, his fast action is really good. Plus a 6-inch take the hit. I think that might be the only model in the game that does that. Maybe.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
So
sense.
I mean, overall, we're looking at the rest of the keyword, without going into every single model, some kind of key points are Paper Tiger is really super cool. It's basically like one of the little paper demons from the Oni keyword, but it also can do hand pressure. So basically, for every model that it damages during its activation, your opponent has to discard a card. And it has made to kill, so it can potentially take 3 attacks during its activation. Forcing your opponent to discard up to 3 cards, which is pretty nasty. Plus, it's a really competent scheme runner. Like, it, it's a move 6 model with Blown by the Wind. Like, it can get anywhere it needs to.
Yep. Plus, and it has made to kill, so when you trigger Blown to the Wind, the second you place it, you can get a free attack out of it. So. Yep,
absolutely. And then, the rest of the models in the keyword I think are very, very good. I think Bookkeepers and Calligraphers are both very well costed minions. I can see myself taking either of them. They both do pretty unique stuff. I don't think that they're always hires. They're kind of like you kind of squeeze in one if you have the points left, but I do feel like the jobs they do are valuable without really going into all the details.
Yeah, I don't think we don't have to harp on everything too much, but I do want to call out exactly what you said. Calligraphers are sometimes food, but let me tell you, when rewrite is good,
ooh boy,
rewrite is good.
It's like analyze weakness, but for everything.
But for everything. And also, the really, really, really messed up interaction that a calligrapher can do is, let's say you're going against like an armor 2 model or something. You run up to that model, you steal armor 2 off of it. The calligrapher now has armor 2, and then you can get into it with whatever you want. So it can take away a lot of problem things. Like the biggest thing that stands out to me is that, sometimes Thunders doesn't love seeing really high value armor targets, right? And that's why I think Calligrapher could be a good out of keyword hire into other Thunders scenarios where you want.
Absolutely. I mean, it's low cost. I mean, hiring it in for a 6. I mean, normally, analyze weakness is not a super efficient ability because a lot of times it's on models that they're kind of high cost. You don't
Expensive.
necessarily want to force their activation at a specific point in the turn. But this guy kind of gets around that because he has Accomplice, which is huge.
Yeah.
So you can go with him, walk up, rewrite within 8 inches. You're hitting
the defensive tech, and
you're doing well versed on your rewrite, so that you know that if you're going to flip a low card, you can just get rid of it. Steal the defensive tech and then Accomplice into another beater so that you can kill whatever you just took the armor away from, or whatever else. Yeah, it's definitely worth mentioning. And then the one thing that I really wanted to mention on Bookkeepers that really stood out to me was their Curse Translations attack.
Yeah.
It's an 8-inch range targeting willpower, 1 blast, 3 blast, 3 blast. And then their mask trigger is target suffers +1 damage for each scheme marker within a 2-inch pulse to a maximum of +2. So this little 6-stone minion turns into a 3 blast, 4 blast, 4 blast. I'm sorry, 3 blast, 5 blast, 5 blast. Which is pretty gross.
This little 5-6 stone minion might pick up half your crew if you're not careful.
yeah, for sure. And then, Mia, I'm sure that we'll probably talk about her a little bit more when we talk about Witness, but she does bring some really cool tech to the keyword. The biggest one is if you activate her kind of midway through the turn, when you put a couple of tomes into your configuration, so that she gets built-in tomes on her Jinx, which is already a super powerful ability.
Yeah.
Now she's jinxing to do damage and injured with built-in surge. Yikes.
I think just using her as a Jinx spam machine that draws cards also is very viable. I will tell you, I have seen some spicy chi barriers though. I have seen a chi barrier that straight up just won a game before. Fight for top of turn 5, immediately trigger chi barrier on 2 different things. Block all lanes to opponent loses game. Is literally, I watched it happen out of the it was out of Witness when it happened, but it was really, really good.
Yep, pretty wild.
Plus she's only 6 points. She's the same amount of points as a bookkeeper.
So I would say, to kind of close it out, in terms of out of keyword hires, I'll be honest, I don't really see a ton of Thunder stuff that you really need to slot into this keyword to add functionality or utility, because this keyword brings all of its own utility.
Yeah, I agree.
The big out of keyword stuff that you might consider taking is basically going to be a beater. Very much like Lynch, where you can rig the deck to really stack your hand and give the resources that you need to turn Lone Swordsman on. I feel like Lone Swordsman is probably going to be a pretty common take in this one as well.
Yeah, I was about to mention that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great model, but it's resource hungry. This keyword can give it the resources that it needs to function.
And it's points efficient for a beater. You're not spending 10, 11 stones. You're spending, Lone Samurai's 8, right?
Lone Swordsman, I think.
Or
I don't even know.
He's either 8 or 9.
No, he's not 9. He's not 9. We're gonna cut. We're gonna keep this in as an outtake while I look this.
A brief intermission.
A brief intermission. Lone Swordsman.
And to your point, I think you're 100% right. I think this is a keyword that likes to play in keyword for all the synergies, but because of how good some of these models are, I actually think it's a little bit of the flip. I think you're going to see a lot of other 10 Thunders keywords looking and shopping at the Red Library for tech,
Yeah.
We talked about it with the Calligrapher, but, I could see an argument for getting a Bookkeeper. I could see an argument for bringing in Story of Rajan for his Middle of the Storm or his Maddening Drums. I could see an argument for Story of Sun Wukong for when you're playing like a covert ops style scenario. Heck, I could see a very strong argument for the Young Man on the Horse for when you need a 6-inch take the hit.
Yeah, I think Story of Tongong is going to see a lot of out of keyword play.
Yeah.
The only other model that that really stood out to me as a potential versatile hire into this keyword was Fuhatsu, which is like no great surprise. He's a faction all-star still, even after an errata. But his front of card ability to allow your models to take interact actions even while engaged is a pretty big deal, because you really want scheme markers down in some key positions, and he's great because he's one of the only models in the game that gives you a benefit when he hits or when he misses. Like, he draws more cards. He has a potential for crit strike on a really threatening gun. This keyword loads up your hand so that you have the resources to funnel into him. It's a great match.
Yep, I agree. So, I mean, I think that's a really good overview in general of what's going on with this keyword. Now, why don't you bring us home, Jesse, and talk a little bit about what do you do if you show up and your opponent declares red library into you? How do you play into such a synergy-driven strategy like this? How do you deconstruct their plan and make their lives a little bit harder if you're playing against them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say this is a keyword that you really, really, really need to focus fire down one of the key models when you have an opportunity to do so. You can't ping them to death because there's just so much healing and there's so much ability to spread damage out. It's kind of like playing into like Nexus, where you just have to punch a model down. So you have to be able to deal. You have to be able to deal with map, and usually that just means brute force and swinging at him a bunch of times before he gets a chance to heal. I don't think he's going to survive very many games, but he's probably going to make it to turn 3, and then if he does, he's done his job.
And take tons of resources from the opponent and a lot of attention.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you need to be able to deal with map, and you need to be able to deal with Tangong, because I feel like they're probably going to get taken most of the time.
Yeah. You're probably going to see those guys every game, probably.
You're also really going to want to make sure that you have an ability to remove scheme markers. The crew really needs scheme markers down to function at full efficiency. So if you have a way that you can pick them up, especially pick up multiple scheme markers at a time, you really want to make sure that you bring it.
I was going to say pulse removal. I mean, there's not too many things in the game that can do pulse removal, but if you've got an effect like, Pandora's Totem has, or like Tull has on his fast action, you're looking for a way to, from an AP efficiency standpoint, out efficiency them dropping those markers, because you can really mess up their game plan if you do that.
And I would say, don't count on winning that many duels against them during their activations, because of the well-versed and because of the sheer volume of card draw that they bring. They're probably going to be able to do basically whatever they want during their activations, and there's not that much you're going to be able to do about it. But they don't have, they're probably going to end up using their well-versed during their activation, so they don't quite have as much ability to ensure that they don't get hit back. They're basically just relying on the cards in hand at that point. So if you're very, very careful about when you commit your high cards, you're definitely going to get a lot more bang for your buck that way.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, this is a great overview. Thank you, Jesse, as always, for coming on. Guys, we are going to have the full suite of Madness of Malifaux reviews with Jesse. You're going to see Brandon doing some episodes with him. Sam is going to do some episodes with him. But overall, we're going to cover the whole Madness book. I guess on our way out, Jesse, is there anything you want to plug that's going on with you from either an event standpoint or anything that's going on with Boring Conversation?
Yeah, I would say, this episode's probably going to post before Captain Con. At this point, you've probably already listened to the Harold Tull episode, so I won't go through the whole spiel again, but it's going to be a really big event. I would really encourage anybody who's even considering going to make your way over to Warwick, Rhode Island, and join us for what I think is probably going to be one of the biggest Malifaux events of the year.
Yeah, it's really well run, guys. Sam and I played as a team last year, and it was the first really competitive Malifaux event I ever really went to. So Sam and I are going to show back up this year as the Danger Planet team. Danger Planet is hoping to send 2 teams to the Content Creators Invitational. There is 2 separate events. So the first event is going to be the Content Creators Invitational. You're going to see, I believe, Defective Dice, Rage Quit Wire, Malifaux University, Danger Planet, and I think there's a couple of others that are kind of brewing. Oh, and Bayou Breakdown. Breakdown.
Yeah, we're probably looking right now. We've got probably 10 content creation channels, probably with like 12 teams or potentially even more by the time the event rolls around.
Yep, and then immediately following the Content Creators Invitational, there is effectively, in my mind, I call it an open. Is that what you're calling it? Okay. Yeah. There'll be an open, which will be, is the open 3 or 5 rounds, Jesse?
5 rounds, 2 days. We're probably looking at over 40 players easily. Yeah, and it's a really fun event, guys. You can check out, if you have any other questions,
Boring Conversation has a Discord. You can always kind of access Jesse there. And Danger Planet also has a Discord. We're going to link both of those there for you guys. And let us know in the comments what you guys think. I mean, I'm speaking for Jesse a little bit here, but I would imagine, Jesse, you're probably very, very excited to get Story and Red Library onto the table.
Yeah. I sad to say, but a couple of those Thunders keywords that I haven't assembled yet are probably going to continue to collect dust.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure that Red Library is going to make it into my top 3.
Yeah, I mean, it should.
If for no other reason, then it seems like a ton of fun to play. And the other big thing, and I can say this for Tull as well, is I love both versions of the Master. I really, really, really value a keyword if I feel like I can be comfortable bringing either version of the Master.
They're both viable.
If I look at, like, just to kind of, beat her up a little bit, I look at Mei Feng and I'm like, wow, I'm always going to play Mei Feng 2 because Mei Feng 1 just like isn't even anywhere as close.
Trash too.
Like, she's not good. I love playing Mei Feng 2. She's one of the most fun masters I've played, but something where I can flex like this, especially where I can flex into different models based on which version of the master I take, is very appealing to me.
Yeah, and then I think the other kind of hidden upside to this is just the existence of Red Library and Story gives so many new out of keyword hires and tech picks into the other 10 Thunders keywords, which I think is really exciting.
I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of things people unlock as we get down the road and they start integrating these models into their other keywords.
Yeah, and I think specifically for me, if I had to call out one thing, I think out of keyword calligraphers are going to be a big deal.
That's going to be, I think, pretty common. Yeah,
it's going to join the ranks of Charm Warder as a pretty strong tech pick.
I would say that if I had to look at any, like, 5-stone models, I always kind of get a bad rap. People knock on them because they just don't do enough or they just die. I think that calligraphers are probably the most well-designed 5-stone model in the game. Right up there with survivors, which I think are absolute all-stars in that point bracket.
It hits the Office Space dilemma where they're interviewing the guy and they're like, what is it you say you do here, 5-stone model?
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
Well, thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. Like I said, we're going to complete out this Madness of Malifaux faction focus. So you're going to see a lot more rolling out from us on the Danger Planet. Let us know what you guys thought in the comics. Make sure you head over and check out Jesse's channel on Boring Conversation. And as always, I almost stole your thunder. Go ahead. Go ahead. Do the closeout, Mr. Jesse.
Yeah, no problem. As always, keep your conversations boring and stay weird, folks.
See you guys. Have a good one.
Real quick, Doug, let's just pause for a sec. I just need to feed my dogs.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good pause point. How are you doing, princess?
Whoa, hungry dogs!